You're listening to the Creepcast on DownrightCreepy.com. Now, here's your creepy host.
Hey everybody, Casey Canton here. You're listening to the Creepcast on Downright Creepy. I'm joined once again by Adam Roberts. On today's show, we're going to be discussing Freaky from the creators of Happy Death Day. It's available on VOD streaming services now. It's been out for a little while. Like we watched it around Halloween time. I think that's when it first came out, right?
No, it came out Friday, November 13th, Tim.
Right. That's right. On Friday the 13th, which is part of the synopsis of the film as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Hope everyone had a good holiday break as we push to the end of 2020. Thank God. Did you do anything interesting over the holidays, or did you just hang out like we did?
Well, I celebrated some pagan traditions by gift giving. I celebrated some weird European traditions by hiding brooms and boarding up my house so the Yule lads didn't burst in and screw up my life.
Those damn Yule lads.
Kind of did a little bit, yeah.
Stealing spoons. Jerks.
Stealing spoons. So I did a little bit of everything. But mostly for me, it was, this is the busy time for movies. Even if there's not a lot of movies out right now, we still pretended it was a busy time. So I've had, unfortunately, been working this whole time.
Well, and if you're in the Kansas City area, you can rent a theater, but slots are filling up fast at Screenland, I believe, right? Or you can rent a movie on ScreenlandOnline.com. So, yeah, if you want to watch your own private screening, this is the time to do it at Screenland. How much does it cost?
I just drank an ice cube.
I saw you dying, so I was trying to keep talking.
I'm trying to play it off, but I'm drinking through a straw, and it's like the ice has been slowly melting, and then you get to the point where you risk drinking an ice cube, and yeah, I just did. It was like a shard of glass into my throat. It's you can watch whatever you want for $100 for 10 people.
It's a great deal.
We've had people watching some crazy stuff, like Conan the Destroyer.
Oh wow! I saw our buddy Bruce watch Krampus. I think that's a great one. To rent out the theater. That's awesome. Well, today, like I said, we're going to talk about Freaky and body swapping. We've seen that kind of synopsis before in many different times, many different ways. It's usually always comedic. This time we have a body swapping horror comedy from the makers of Happy Death Day. So what I wanted to do to start the podcast out before we get into our review of the movie is just talk about body swapping in general. Like, who would you swap a body with? Whether it's, we'll start with more of a general basis of people, and then we'll go into a genre specific character. But yeah, who would you want to swap bodies with? I almost considered, like, how could we make the whole podcast us swapping bodies and making our point of views each other's? I'm like, how would that work? It just doesn't work. Like, you almost have to have someone that's a real big character. I feel like our friend Gary to really hype up personalities. So anyway, we're going to stick with just some general people that we'd swap bodies with. We picked famous people. You could pick anyone. I want to hear what you guys have to say. You can hashtag it Creepcast on Twitter, at Downright Creepy on Twitter, or Creepcast Pod. We want to hear who you would swap bodies with. So let's start off with Adam. Who would you swap bodies with? Let's start with a male character.
Well, Tim,
not character, but person, I should say.
So this would be like, if I were writing this movie, this is who I would cast, right?
Sure.
Or I guess this would be who
this is just in life.
Is this in real life? Like, Adam switches bodies with this male?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's why I'm super surprised with your answer that I saw on our worksheet. And I kind of want you to just keep it now.
Okay, in my head, I was casting. I was just recasting the movie.
No.
Okay,
perfect.
Well, all right. I guess if I were gonna switch with any guy, the first one that came to my head was Steve Buscemi.
As someone you were gonna cast, but I mean, I like it better in real life.
I like it better in real life too. I feel like I didn't understand the question here. I thought it was a recast, but yeah, Steve Buscemi, why not? I think that's a person who's had a tremendous career of starring roles, a lot of like bit roles, but he was a fireman. Like he's kind of done everything I think you could do. He does the like live theater.
He has a cool crazy eye.
Yeah, he's a wild card of a person. I don't know much about him. I know he's a tried and true New Yorker, and I could get down with that. I think
he's a chameleon as an actor.
He's a chameleon. Yeah,
multi-talented.
Who would you change into? I mean, your pick couldn't be better than Steve Buscemi.
I mean, I feel like these two they're completely different types of individuals, but both legendary in their own right. I picked Bill Murray because he's lived such a life. Like it's just a well-lived life. He's a legend. He's got, to cast a role with him, you have to call a number and leave a message. That's the only way you can get a hold of him. And then you hope he calls you back. So I think that's pretty incredible. He's reached that status where he kind of just doesn't care, and he'll only take the roles he wants. He seems to always work with Wes Anderson, no matter what. But then he was in like a Jeep commercial for Groundhog and had the Groundhog Day parody during the Super Bowl last year.
Yeah,
which was bizarre knowing the casting process. But bringing that character back for a little bit was awesome. He'll randomly photobomb people at wedding proposals or bachelor parties. I think that's just kind of interesting. And he's a tried and true Chicagoan, kind of like Buscemi is for New York. So, I mean, Bill Murray, he's probably my favorite actor of all time, just because, and he always kind of plays the same role for the most part. He's just kind of like Bill Murray in whatever movie he's in. He almost doesn't even hide himself in the character anymore. So yeah, Bill Murray's my male. Who is your female character or real person that you want to be in real life?
Again, I thought
I'll give you a mulligan.
A movie.
I'll give you a mulligan if you want.
Well, I haven't really been thinking too hard about it, so I think this would be an incredibly different life than I'm currently living. And now it's definitely going to make the next category make more sense than what my category. I mean, I think what I was doing here would be a tremendous movie. So the woman I picked, if I was going to swap into a female's body, as recasting for this movie would have been Paris Hilton.
Yes.
I think Steve Buscemi and Paris Hilton flipping would be just a great little bit. I think I might stand by that. I think, Paris Hilton, the more I know about Paris Hilton, the more I'm fascinated. Like that, apparently that like when she was popular on like her reality show and stuff, that like what we know of Paris Hilton was, I guess, a character that she was playing and not who she actually is in real life. Like, I guess she's an incredibly smart and like well-spoken and like successful or I guess she's not a young woman anymore, but she was then, and she was kind of like playing, a stereotypical character, which I found kind of fascinating. And I don't know if that's really widely known, but because I only found out about that like the last year or two, and I was like, what? But it also makes a lot
rumors
more
sense. Of it. I heard rumors of that, but I didn't know if that was true. So that's interesting I feel like confirm, because I mean that's fascinating, because all those reality shows, which is how she kind of rose to fame, is it's scripted anyway. Like it makes you wonder too about the Kardashians a little bit, as Kim is trying to become a lawyer and Paris being one of the first kind of socialites I feel like we saw on reality TV at least. So yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it was a good business move by her. So what do you like most about Paris Hilton that you would want to swap bodies with?
Mostly that I don't think I know too much about her. So I think it would be a fascinating change, really. Like I would, in earnest, not really know what I was getting myself into, especially if she has this, if that was like an actual character she was playing, then I really don't know. Like in my head, if I woke up and I saw Paris Hilton in the mirror, I would think I was supposed to be like this, like over the top kind of like socialite. Yeah. And if the reality is like a hardworking, very intelligent businesswoman, I think I would be playing her inaccurately. So I'd have to quickly adapt to that. I think it would be a fun, I think it'd be, there's like a lot of people that I'm like, oh, I think I know who this person is based on like how much I've like seen them. Like, like somebody like Aubrey Plaza would probably be a really fun person to be inside of.
Whoa. Take it easy.
I mean, like if I was soul exchanging here, but I think that's like a kind of more of an obvious choice because I think I know what I'd be getting into. But with Paris Hilton, I don't know what I would be getting into and what her life would be like. I think it'd be a fascinating choice. I would come out truly having walked a mile in their shoes.
Someone else's shoes. Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Aubrey Plaza because I was actually going to mention that as who I would hope you would pick because you said you know a little bit more about what you're getting into. But from what I've seen from her in the public eye, at least, she is truly a wild card where I feel like you know on the surface from public facing, you know what Paris Hilton is. But Aubrey Plaza, you know, she's in these interviews. She just acts kind of weird sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like she does that just to almost entertain herself as a character. But I picked, I believe, Aubrey Plaza's best friend, Anna Kendrick, who I think is America's like sweetheart in a lot of ways. And I probably also picked her. I've had a chance to interview her once for Paranorman at San Diego Comic-Con, and it was less of an interview and just look at the photos on my phone from the set of Paranorman and more of a casual conversation. It didn't feel like we were kind of doing an interview. It was more just chatting. Also, my wife occasionally gets like, hey, you look like Anna Kendrick a little bit, which I would on occasion, which I don't see this at all, would get Seth Rogen when I guess I had more facial hair. I don't understand that either. And what an odd pairing that would be. Anna Kendrick and Seth Rogen.
I mean, it sounds like the next failed Lionsgate release that they won't know what to do with.
It's a romantic comedy, but not as good as Charlize Theron pairing. Who would have knew that would work? So yeah, I think I picked Anna Kendrick. I feel like she's kind of universally loved, but still kind of a nerd at heart a little bit. So I picked her and Bill Murray, which coincidentally, if we were swapping bodies or swapping characters out and recasting this film, I think would also be interesting. Anna Kendrick and Bill Murray swapping.
Yeah, I agree. I would watch that movie. It's no Paris Hilton and Stu Buscemi, but
it's not. There's probably more immediate interest in your pairing because of the bizarreness of it. I feel like at least Bill Murray and Anna Kendrick are kind of quirky and playful together, where yours is just a complete out of left field pairing that would probably somehow work. So now let's get into genre specific actual characters in movies. If you could swap places with one of them and take on their role, who would you pick for it? Let's start with the female character this time.
Okay, so I did have a second to readapt to this, but I will.
That's a good pick.
I will honorably mention my original casting because again, in my head, I was recasting Freaky, so it'd be like. So in my head, it was like just like my own body swap movie, and what I thought you were doing with the genre specific swaps would be like, what would be two fun like genre characters in movies that would be swapped. So in that instance, I was like, oh, Nancy Thompson swapping bodies with Freddy Krueger. So she's Freddy and she's in the dreams, and he's walking around as a high school girl. I'm like, that would be a fascinating body swap movie.
I feel like they tried to do that in a scene somewhere along the line. Was it in the New Nightmare? I mean, not fully like you're talking, but I felt like it was like very small scene hinted at, but seeing a full movie take place like that would have been really interesting.
Yeah, it'd have to be played for laughs, but that's why I thought it'd be like, oh, that's a very simple, obvious one. That'd be like a fun little switch.
Man, what if you had Nancy's like daughter in a modern day one, right? And the daughter swapped with Freddy, and she thought her daughter was just her daughter, but it was actually Freddy coming back to terrorize her as her teenage daughter. Becomes a horror comedy.
Her toddler daughter.
Toddler daughter?
Yes.
Oh god.
So it's got maybe not even a toddler, maybe like a child, like an 8 or 9 year old, like Home Alone vibe. So Nancy Thompson's like running around the house trying to survive and like maim but not kill her 8-year-old daughter, who's actually Freddy Krueger.
And she's so tired from dealing with this kid that she just goes to bed at like 9. And she has
well, you remember for the last act of Nightmare on Elm Street, it is basically Home Alone. Like she's like setting traps. So this is just like kind of like taking it back to the original. Like this is more like, and because it's a child, like it makes more sense that there's like more like childlike gags, but she's still trying to trap and not kill her daughter because she has to separate the Freddy somehow.
What if she
I would watch this
kill
movie.
the daughter though?
This is a body swap movie,
Ooh.
a dream movie, and a Home Alone nod.
It's got everything.
It's truly got it all.
It's got nostalgia. You pull nostalgia in too.
Yeah, we should cut this all out because this is a pretty good movie.
Yeah, this is a pitch that someone's gonna make, and we're gonna be fucked. We're not gonna get any credit for it. I bet we have one good idea on every podcast if we tried like this.
One single good idea.
Just have a new segment at the beginning of every podcast, like every 4 podcasts, where it's just we pitch a new movie idea.
Well, we have my actual picks though. Okay, so my female genre character that I would body swap into would be Furiosa.
Yeah, it's a great pick.
I think it's very similar in that I don't really necessarily know what I'd be getting myself into, other than like a complicated, strong, powerful character that's like on the cusp of leading a revolution. I think that's a fascinating. Both my characters are very similar actually in what they're doing, but the levels they're doing, and I guess the types of films they're in are totally different. But yeah, Furiosa.
My pick, first of all, it's great. That's a great actual pick. So I went a little more. You kind of did the same thing. You had someone that was from the past, and you had someone in a little more modern film. I'll start with my modern pick. I picked Sharni Vincent's character Aaron in You're Next. I love You're Next, and it also becomes a little Home Alone ish as it progresses. It's really a horror comedy, and it was not what I expected when I first saw it in theaters, based on kind of how they promoted it in the trailers. I feel like she's very strong character. It's almost an action character when it comes down to it, but she has a ton to overcome, and then comes out on the other side as a final girl. But I love that film, and I love that character. I have for quite a while. And then my kind of honorable mention or throwback, if you will, would be Sigourney Weaver, Ripley in Alien. Feels like a pioneer to have a woman as a female lead in space. So she's a great one as well. And then I'm gonna flow into my male character because I feel like this encompasses how I would feel and probably react in a zombie apocalypse. I picked Simon Pegg and Shaun of the Dead. Just having, dealing with girl troubles during a zombie apocalypse, I feel like is something I would relate to, especially my younger self. And then having a friend that just wants to kind of sit around and play games all day and be irresponsible. Feels like someone I could and have to kind of get them in line. And now I feel like I've body swapped with the guy that just sits around and plays video games all day and is irresponsible. So those are I am that guy now. So those are my picks. Who was your male pick?
My male pick is another mysterious character. I think I just like mysterious people. Now, I mean, if you look at my Paris Hilton, Steve Buscemi, Furiosa, and my male would be the driver, the driver from Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive. I think
that's a great pick.
I think he's seen some shit. I think he's had a life, and we don't really necessarily know all the details. So I think getting in his head to know all those details would be fun. But also, like, he's kind of a superhero. Like, he's unable to maybe be killed. So I think that'd be a fun little pick. And also, if you swap them, I guess, in a movie, Furiosa and the driver, they're both very good at driving vehicles. So I think it'd work. And I think they could both handle a hammer pretty well.
Yes. They both have a nice curb stomp.
Yeah.
As well. Those are great picks. I there's so many as I was trying to think of them. Like I could list like my top 5. I'm just going to throw 2 out there, but the driver is fantastic. Man, I think in line with that, you could pick the guest. You could pick that character as well. The driver, the guest. Those are great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think those are good ones. Let us hear what your picks would be, whether it's in real life or if you want to swap bodies with a character in a film. What would they be? At Creepcast, #Creepcast, or at Downright Creepy. Let us know. But let's get into the review. Today's review is Freaky from the creators of Happy Death Day. And to set it up for you, I mean, it's a pretty easy setup, but essentially, after swapping bodies with a deranged serial killer, a young girl from high school discovers she has less than 24 hours to change back before it becomes permanent. This, of course, stars Vince Vaughn, who is our main protagonist as the Blissfield Butcher, and then Catherine Newton as Millie. From writer and director, as I mentioned before, Michael Kennedy and Christopher Landon from the Happy Death Day series. So I love the casting in this. First of all, I think there could be a bunch of interesting ones like we talked about before if you were to recast the movie. But seeing Vince Vaughn, you know, we're used to him in comedies. We've seen him in quite a few genre-based things, though, as of late. And really, as I started looking through his filmography throughout his career, that you just kind of forget about. But before we take a deeper dive into the characters, the setup, we rarely see a body swap in the horror genre. And what better duo, I think, than the Happy Death Day guys, because they kind of took the supernatural thing of Groundhog Day and put a horror twist on it. Groundhog Day being kind of a dark comedy a little bit. And now you're taking essentially something like Freaky Friday and adding a dark twist to that. So I think that's really interesting dynamic and kind of yin and yang of swapping people. The primary principle is always like old versus young or black and white and so on. But now we use the teen angst and kind of the trials and tribulations of high school with Millie as that plot device. It kind of sets up the simplicity of the story. It's just like, well, you got to get through high school. And now on top of it, you got to deal with something insane, like combining a serial killer who terrorizes teens. And now you got a formula for something much more fun.
I think it's pretty surprising that nobody has done what Landon's doing, which is just taking like simple ideas and taking a comedy horror twist to them, because they've done it. You know, we've seen that forever with like Grimm fairy tales or Aesop's fables or all these different types of things that have been adapted 1,000 different ways and you know, had a bunch of different twists on them. And I think this is just a really clever way to do it. And there's, you know, I remember before the movie released, I think similarly to Happy Death Day, but definitely more so with this, people are like, oh, I roll like Freaky Friday, but horror. Yeah. Like how many times can we recycle these ideas? But I'm like, well, who has done the Freaky Friday but horror? And every Freaky Friday is like has a different slight twist to it, like whether it's an age differential or the person that's being swapped into it. I mean, but then you have like, you know, I think it's just like, why not give it a shot? And certainly like the trailer, I was like, well, the idea inspired me, was inspiring, and I think the trailer was like, okay, I think they might pull this off, but it's either going to be a train wreck or it's going to be fantastic. And the advertising was so. I think with this, especially when it comes to like the posters and stuff, I think the posters were very bland. I think very boring, but that's also maybe due to the pandemic. I don't know how much like their marketing team was fully functioning during this time. Yeah, I don't know how pieced together it was. But well, should we just dive into our setup and get into the review? Because I'm ready. I'm ready to do it. But yeah, there was like, I don't know how much you tracked it, but there was a decent amount of criticism before this movie even came out. Just like that it seemed like a stale, boring idea.
Yeah, there was. And then even with the posters, it came down to like, well, the way that they had Catherine Newton's character like shaving, is there transphobia attached to it? You know, there's some. So I mean, there was people kind of starting to pick it apart before it even came out. And to your point, I don't feel like anyone's done anything like this. And certainly, in my opinion, when I saw Vince Vaughn was attached, I immediately was more interested than if we had someone a little lesser known. And speaking of Vince Vaughn, you know, I brought it up briefly there. Like, we normally think of Vaughn as straight comedian, right? Like, you probably think of more roles like Wedding Crashers or Old School or Made, you know, his first movies that he did with Jon Favreau. But when you look at his filmography, he's actually done some more serious roles within the genre, like The Cell early on. He was in the remake of Psycho, whether you liked it or not. It's there as Norman Bates.
Whether you like it or not, you have it. It's there.
It existed. Dragged Across Concrete was great. True Detective, which was a little lesser well received. So he's had all these roles in different scenarios, but never kind of crossed them into one another. So I felt like having Vince Vaughn do that is kind of a perfect person to bring into the role. And he's very expression based, and most of his roles too, which is good for someone that's trying to channel a teenager, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think he's one that has had a fair amount of criticism. In the 2000s, he was kind of like, he was part of the precursor to like the Apatow bunch, like him and like Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller, and I think that group of people, and even Will Ferrell, that were like up and up R-rated comedians that maybe their movies didn't all age that well, but he was always doing a diverse list of stuff. I mean, his first breakout was Swingers, and in that movie he's the comic relief, but also he's got one or two big moments where he's got to be very dramatic. And since then he's balanced it, like Clay Pigeons. Like a lot of his early stuff was like pretty balanced, like drama with a hint of like playful comedy. And then in the last couple of years, we've seen him like now he's 50s, and he's trying to find like who he is now as an actor. And maybe he can't do the Wedding Crashers thing. Maybe he can, but I don't know if he wants to. But how do you like maintain the level of like playfulness that he's known for in his current state, his current body, Tim?
Yeah, his current body of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Once you hit a certain age, you kind of have to transform a little bit, probably. I feel like he's found that though with Dragged Across Concrete and True Detective, and regardless of how that was received, I still liked him in it. But yeah, I think that's a great point. I love Swingers and Maid, by the way. Those are just fantastic. I feel like they've aged well even to this day.
Yeah.
For kind of low budget shoestring filmmaking back then. And then of course our other person is Catherine Newton, who I mostly know and only know from Blockers, which was another coming of age film that kind of falls more in line with Superbad a little bit. It's a little more raunchy, but it doesn't just focus on the kids. You actually got the parents as a big part of the movie as well. But I know her from that, and she kind of revisits the awkwardness of high school again with her role as Millie, and her life is turned upside down when we get the Blissfield butcher. He attacks once again at the high school football game. But I also wanted to bring up, while we get into characters, before we get into the pros and cons or the opening scene, that I really want to talk about a little bit, is the diversity of the cast. They had Celeste O'Connor and Misha Osherovich, I believe I'm saying his name correctly, who played Newton's best friends in the film. And at one point, because Misha plays a gay character, Celeste is black. At one point, Misha's character kind of breaks the fourth wall as they're being chased by the Blissfield butcher, and even says, "We're screwed. We don't stand a chance because you're black and I'm gay." And it was kind of a little jab at the horror tropes and what ends up happening with characters typically in horror films that are of color or gay. They end up dying first, right? Like, so it's almost a poke at the horror genre in general. But it was nice to see some diverse casting in those roles as well, because they do play. They're not like featured players, but they're definitely big supporting cast that's in the movie throughout.
Yeah, and the cast really hold. I mean, for any film, I think, but particularly in the horror separate from comedy, like casts are make it or break it for really what your movie is going to be. And I think these characters from top to bottom are so honest and likable and fun, and that goes all the way to the casting. I think they just did a tremendous job here, and really like helps elevate and sell the movie for me at least.
Yeah, it was the weight of the supporting cast was really important for this film because they're in it so much. So I want to go ahead and get into the meat of the story and talk about pros and cons. And I think the best place to start, because it's such a great opening scene, is like the first 20 minutes. We get so much tribute and kind of homage to horror history in that, and it gets us right into the film. It's it's action packed from the get-go, playing on the horror tropes a little bit on purpose. But I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit. There's several things, and this is a spoiler podcast. We will get into it's been out a while as well, so we will get into some points that spoil the movie. But these are some great things that you can pick up on in the first 20 minutes. Do you want to talk about it a little bit, or do you want me to jump into some of my favorite things that they pay tribute to?
I mean, yeah, we can just go head first into it. I mean, the opening of this, it's, we haven't seen a cold open slasher sequence in quite some time. I feel like, or at least done so playfully. Like we've maybe seen it, but we haven't seen it like this. And this movie, this like sequence made me feel, having just rewatched all the Friday the 13th movies, made me feel definitely in that vein, but even more so like the tone of like the video game for Friday the 13th. If you've played that, like it actually has that tone quite a bit, where it's more like there's like the actual Friday the 13th movies, and there's how we all remember the Friday the 13th movies. And I think that's how the tone of the game is. And that's how this opening sequence kind of plays out. It's tonally, an 80s slasher movie, quickly updated without really acknowledging much to today's standards. And they basically proved that you could do a slasher movie with cell phones and with like the same kids, because even though they're not in the 80s or 90s anymore, the archetypes and the characters are, and what they do and say and how they react are still the exact same. We really haven't seen that since. But before we go fully into this, I'm actually very excited, Tim, because I think we're going to get the rebirth of the slasher. I think is actually upon us now. Not only do we have another entry to the Scream franchise coming up, but we're about to get the second of the new Halloween series. Two of them. Yeah. And then we have had like kind of like slasher adjacent things in the last couple of years, like the Final Girls. We had Tragedy Girls,
American Horror Story, the whole
1984, which I think is their best season they've ever done. I think it's like the most complete. As much as I love American Horror Story, they meander a little bit and typically fall apart at the end. But that season was just, it maintained the tone and story and structure for what that was always going to be the entire time, even when it becomes a little bit more magical. But we're definitely in like this resurgence of the slashers, I think, which is really fun. I mean, we're going to have a Candyman next year.
Yeah.
And a new Saw movie. So like we're getting reboots of popular franchises, but then we're still getting some original stuff like this and some of those other titles I mentioned. So I think the slasher maybe, in the mid 2000s to like really like the last couple of years, it was all about zombies. And I think we're getting a resurgence. Yeah, I think, in like the Dawn of the Dead remake, I think 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, all these things kind of sent that, and Romero was making films again. But now I think we're seeing new voices telling these same types of stories that were so popular in the late 70s and 80s, and some of them with iconic villains and some of them with brand new villains. And I think this movie makes me more excited that there would be more movies like this. Had it been a normal year, I think this movie would have fucking blown up the box office. I think it's such a crowd induced fun movie, and seeing it in a packed audience. This is, I feel terrible for Christopher Landon, because this movie would have played like gangbusters in a packed crowd, because there's so many funny moments, there's actual genuine scares, and it pushes the boundaries on what we've seen recently in violence and gore in a mainstream horror film, and it does all that while making you laugh nonstop, I think. Tim, if you don't know, I really like this movie.
I know that we only talked very briefly in like sentences about this movie, but we haven't shared our full thoughts on it. I knew you liked it a lot, so I knew that coming in, but I think we'll get into maybe why you liked it a lot. And I think that's a lot of good points that you made, especially about the rebirth of slashers. They've never 100% went away or anything like that, but we're definitely getting more content where they're there, and especially coming into the new year. And I especially am interested in the mythos of these things. You brought up Saw, which is going to be Spiral, and it's of the book of Saw. So you're going to kind of get a spin-off of that, and that mythos. You're going to get a retelling and completely different story with Candyman, a different perspective on it with the Costas take. So yeah, I love it. A lot of people be like, well, there's no original ideas left. Well, even within those franchises, there's original ideas that can spin out of it. It's not just regurgitating, I think. And I feel like Candyman and Spiral will be good examples of that.
Yeah. Well, and even like in the last couple of years, we've had movies like It Follows, which is, has the tone of a slasher film.
Yeah, like a Nightmare on Elm Street
theme
or vibe. Yeah.
Well, and you had Us, which is I would say 100% a slasher movie.
For sure.
And then you've had a couple of the Creep movies. Those are both slasher films.
Yep.
But they're done differently to where they're not on the surface what we all grew up knowing what the slasher movie is. So people are finding
it's not as campy.
ways.
You're finding more serious tones within those subgenres. Yeah.
And there's somebody out there that's kicking us right now, Tim. They're like, "What about the next Texas Chainsaw Massacre?" And I say,
right.
I don't. That franchise shouldn't exist. First of all,
it just keeps regurgitating, right? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't advance the storyline. I feel like
no, absolutely not.
Just keeps happening.
But yeah, I think we're getting a good. Some of the best horror films now are becoming those slasher films, and they're really like, and they're also like going back to what we loved, like the Friday the 13th films, and not making fun of it, but acknowledging the history and the tropes that those movies set up, and by doing so, I think they naturally get like some solid commentary in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited, especially for next year. We're gonna have like 4 or 5 new entries into some of the most iconic of icons, right? The iconics of iconics.
It's like, well, if nothing else, with all the films getting pushed out, the only silver lining is we're going to have a lot to enjoy next year. If
all right,
nothing else. So let's get
into it.
You talked about, all those things pay homage to the classics in kind of unique and clever ways. That is a great segue to the opening scene of Freaky, because the film, like I said, wastes no time. We get right into some lore and gore, if you will, the Blissfield Butcher, as Vaughn starts to prey on this teen party that happens, which of course is a trope in the genre, to kind of set it up. And it's like a 20-minute, 15-minute scene of him stalking and killing, teens at a party of some sort. And at first I thought these were going to be some of the main characters.
Same. I was like, who's going to survive here? Oh, that must be the final girl because she's a little bit more innocent.
Yeah, you thought there'd be someone that comes out of the party that's like one of the main figures, or at least a side character of the story, but that's not the case. And I'm okay with it. Like, they're all disposable. We get a vibe of it, but more importantly, we got a lot of nods to classic films. And
so besides Texas Chainsaw 2, is there another film that starts with a whole a cast for this long that eventually kills them all off before introducing the real cast?
Dude, I don't know. I feel like there have been not like,
because usually there's an opening kill or two, but
like Scream, right? Like Drew Barrymore gone in Scream in the beginning, and you would have thought Drew Barrymore would be in it, or even Psycho, right? Like, you get that, which is interesting.
But that's still only like one person. But this is like the entire cast of characters. So I guess from here on out, we're going to be discussing the film. So spoilers, if you haven't watched it, you can rent it, or some theaters are still showing it. But I would suggest is purchasing this movie on Blu-ray or digital, however you want to do it, because it's worth adding to your collection. But spoilers start now. This movie just starts immediately. I mean, it is right into the, there's a campfire, they're drinking, they're drunk, they're smoking weed, they're talking about sex. All the tropes are set up literally in the first 30 seconds. And I think the killer is present within the first 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and it's almost set up in a way that it's comical and just how quick it's happening. Like, all that's set up in under 5 minutes. You see Vaughn is at the party. He takes a mask from the wall, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like a rich kid's house. So there's all these antiques inside. And that's why he's there, actually, is for a knife that is apparently cursed.
It also reminded me of the room in the movie, the Jim Carrey classic, The Mask, where there's just like all these like a little bit, African masks on the wall for some reason. And he puts one of them on. It's magic. That's why I kind of expected. I was like, oh, it's going to be the mask that makes this like body swap thing happen.
Yeah.
But no, it was not the mask. But we get a ton of kills here in this sequence, and so many funny and insane kills and false scares. There was so many false scares. I was like, oh, we're gonna get the trope, because the camera at one point when the kid's like getting the bottle of wine, it's like going up and down up and down, and you're just waiting for him to appear behind him, and it never fucking happens.
Like the head gets chopped off when he comes up.
Yeah, it's just done.
Well, I think they have like interesting kills too. Like there's a tennis racket or something used at one point. I don't even remember if it's in the opening sequence. I feel like it was. Yeah, what is it? Probably 6 to 8 kids die in the opening.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where that almost becomes comical in itself. But there was there was a lot of nods to stuff, and as Adam mentioned, spoilers. I'm gonna just say one more time. So if you did watch it, let me know if we didn't catch something. These are the ones I was like writing down when I saw it. But like, there's a Silent Night, Deadly Night when the antler kill happens, and then in the same action, we get kind of the Michael Myers head tilt happen while they're on the antlers. Friday the 13th, you brought that up, and how it reminded you a little bit of that. I thought it was great bringing up the game of how you kind of remember it versus what the movie was, because the game was awful. And so we get kind of the Jason Friday the 13th spear throw. He bursts through a wooden door like it's just nothing.
Explodes,
Yeah. And then even later on in the film, we get kind of a Jason in space frozen person that gets shattered, which another kind of tilt of the hat to Friday the 13th. And then another thing, it's not necessarily in the opening scene, but since we're on kind of paying homage to stuff, they use the Aaron Rodgers mask to try and hide the identity of Vince Vaughn once the body swap has happened, which kind of reminds me a little bit of like an out of place mask that you wouldn't expect, or like why Aaron Rodgers? Are the writers fans of the Packers? Like, I don't know, but it reminded me of William Shatner's mask being turned inside out for Michael Myers' mask.
I just imagine that was like, oh, we'll just use Mike Myers. And then they're like, oh, we can't do that. Baby Driver did that.
Right. Or they, for whatever reason, they just thought they couldn't do it. It would have been more funny if they actually used a real serial killer or something, because then it breaks down the wall of like, wait, does this exist in movie world or like real life? If they put on a Texas Chainsaw mask or something.
Well, I think like using
Aaron Rodgers, it's hilarious to me.
Yeah, I think using Aaron Rodgers is like there's probably like a minute where they're like, oh, we can be political and make like a Trump mask, or but that's also been done before. Like, how many times have we seen like a political figure mask in a movie? And it's like, oh, we can go for the obvious joke if he wears the Austin Powers mask. Oh, that was done in Baby Driver. And it's like, so then let's just like not make any statements. Let's just go for like the most random thing. Like, who has a mask that is just so random? And I'm guessing Aaron Rodgers for some fucking reason has a mask out there, and
he does.
That is just so random, and it's like very just so random because why would he have a mask? But it's immediately funny because it's so authentically random.
I also thought it was funny because I believe, since at this point Vaughn is a teenager, his character goes, wait, why am I wearing this old man mask? Like, she doesn't even know who Aaron Rodgers is.
Yeah,
it was kind of funny too. Is there anything I missed in that was just kind of tribute to old horror films?
I mean, there's like a lot that aren't necessarily specific because they happen so often, like the separation of characters for no reason, like splitting up the immediate. I mean, a lot of them are just Friday the 13th stuff. And this takes place on this is I can't remember exact. Is this the 12th?
Yeah, it takes place, I think,
on the 12th.
Well, it starts on the 12th. The homecoming game is, I think, on Friday the 13th, which is the next day. So it unfolds on Friday the 13th. We start on the 12th.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to mention that I missed is the Candyman reference. We talked about Candyman in the opening.
Oh, yeah.
There's the hook, the leather jacket, and she walks out of the wall, which is essentially someone's big mouth opened up and graffiti. So we get kind of a nod to definite nod to the Candyman in that too. But yeah, this does start on the 12th and goes into the 13th as it all kind of unfolds. And I don't know if we want to talk about how the body swap happens, because I feel like that's always something that's interesting in all these as well. Like, how does it happen? You end up always waking up the next day and you're like, oh no, I've got a penis, or I'm in a dress, or I've got long hair, and they notice it when they get into the look into the mirror. Whether it's a wish in a well and you flip a penny in. But this one was a much more violent take on that, of how we get to this point, which goes back to the opening scene and the artifacts that we were talking about.
Yeah, the artifacts of all the masks, there's like, I think, some shields in there, and then of course a magical dagger, because why wouldn't there be a magical dagger? So all the kids, there is a final girl. There's like a panic room and stuff she hides in and comes out, after the killer. The biggest pet peeve is like, oh, you're hiding. The killer walks out of the room. And you're like, okay, now I immediately come out, rather than just stay there for four days,
right?
Which is what you would always do. Like, I would never leave the panic room. You've already established being safe. He's probably just going to leave you. But of course she comes out. There's a final battle, and we get the magical dagger, I think, in a shot before this. And does it glow? It does something, right?
Yeah, like I think there's a snake maybe wrapped around it, if I'm recalling, because I did watch this back in November. I think there's like a snake around the dagger, and it kind of comes to life. It glows. Lightning has to strike.
Mm-hmm.
And as he's pinning her down after the football game is over, which I thought was funny, she is the mascot at the football game at homecoming, which in my mind immediately went to Happy Death Day with the mascot that was there. That is the killer. So it felt like it was a tie back to that. But yeah, she's the mascot and gets left alone because her mom forgets to pick her up. And Vaughn pins her down on the football field after a chase, of course. And as he's starting to, stab her, everything changes around us. An interdimensional thing happens with lightning. The ancient dagger comes to life, like you mentioned. And that's when the swap ultimately ends up happening. And Vaughn's plan kind of just gets turned upside down and becomes Millie at that point. So it's not enough at just being awkward and dealing with puberty and the awkwardness of homecoming dances. Now you're a serial killer on top of it and have to deal with a man's body. So yeah, that's kind of how we get here to begin with, because I feel like the body swap and the initiation of it and the realization of it is a real kind of like linchpin in these types of films.
Yeah. Well, and we get the lead character set up pretty quickly. And I like Millie a lot. And she's just immediately likable. I think they play her well. The only thing that I don't like is they do a little bit of the she's all that thing where it's like, oh, she's not that pretty.
I know.
And and then somehow Vince Vaughn puts the right outfit on. She's just sex icon. It was like,
right.
From scene one, she was always like a very beautiful woman. Right. So that was like the only kind of misstep here for me, but it's fine. It's a movie about body swapping. So there's a couple of laughs for it, but it's the only thing that's like a little unbelievable. But yeah, so they switch bodies. At midnight, it's like it's done so over the top and fantastical. Maybe the best of any of the Freaky Friday movies, because usually it's like we both had wishes at a well or something, and the next morning we swap bodies or something. It's always dumb.
Just go to bed and come up. They go to a Zoltar machine.
It's always something like that. But this is like, oh no, this magical dagger that pierces one of their flesh, somehow connects both of them together, and then has this quick lore of you have 24 hours before it sets permanently.
Yeah, how did you find that out so fast?
Yeah, so that's the cusp of what's going to happen and sets them on pace for this whole Friday the 13th film.
What I think carries the movie too is that we don't have a lot of time to learn about the characters up front, especially Vaughn's character, right? We get that sequence of him killing people, but we don't know anything about him. Millie, we get more personality out of her. What type of person she is. And we have to have that because we need that character trait and set to transfer over to Vince Vaughn now.
Yeah.
And without that, it just becomes kind of pretty hollow. But we don't get the same with Vaughn. We get a little bit, but not enough, I felt like, to truly know what it would be like for him to go into the body of a teenage girl, other than, hey, I'm a creepy guy that's not going to talk much and I'm going to scowl. Yeah. So Millie's performance for Vaughn was super important for him to be able to translate her traits over to that character.
Well, yeah, and having it wait, I mean, that the body shift I don't even think happen until, because that opening sequence is so long and establishes so much about his character. I mean, the opening, we get the scene with Millie and her family, which really quickly establishes who she is and kind of what she's going through. She's lost her father. Her mom's going through a rough spout of it. Her sister's kind of trying to keep things together as a police officer. Yeah. And then we introduce her friends and we just get a couple of tidbits and that's kind of we get her ordinary life. And then it's turned and flipped upside down by this body shift and her waking up in Vince Vaughn's body works so well because we get that 20 minutes. Again, I think this is an hour 45 movie, and this is probably 45 minutes in is when the body shift happens, and it only works so well because I think everyone's fear was that we're just gonna have Vince Vaughn for an hour and a half as this like teenage girl, and that would not have worked. But because we've set the rules, we've set who he is, and that he is this dangerous figure, and that she's this vulnerable, like, you know, there's this coming of age story with her, and she's had some real trauma in her life. We're prepared as an audience to go down the rabbit hole for when the body shift happens, and it works really well. Like both of them waking up and that scene, which again has been done 1,000 times, but never quite like this. You never have seen a psychopathic character who has not said a single word in this movie up to this point wake up in a bright pink filled like teenage dream, and then, you know, on that other side of the coin, you've never seen a teenage woman wake up in an abandoned building with body parts and skulls.
Some homeless people.
Yeah. And like trying to do drugs and all this stuff.
Yeah.
You've never seen that happen. So like, that's where the movie takes the original takes from their first scene of the body swap. It's the same thing done different every time, and sequences we've never seen before, even though we know what's going to eventually happen at the end. The ride is what we're going with for here, and it's with the characters we've already established and we like. And then from here on, it's going back and forth, like again, any of those movies do, watching them, you know, work against the clock to try to get the body swap back so it doesn't become permanent. And you get all these really great moments, I think, with the characters, like her friends, like when she's chasing her friends in the fight in the cafeteria is great.
You start to get the high school cliques start to play into this as well. The popular kids, the jocks, you still have all those things in a teen comedy come to life through the horror lens, because Millie at this point, you know, everyone thinks she's this new, you know, popular girl because she put a leather jacket on and has a little more attitude toward people. She's not as passive, like you said, the she's all that trope. I think it's nice to still see some of those elements, but then through a different lens and how they go approach it, which brings me to something that I loved, which was Alan Ruck's cameo in this as the shop teacher. Because normally, you know, Millie's in class, she's in shop class, she probably doesn't do very well, and she's late sometimes, she's on her phone, she gets called out for it, kind of picked on almost by Alan Ruck's character, and it comes back to haunt him a little bit later. But what I thought was most interesting is casting him as a teacher, who's widely known in the classic Ferris Bueller as Cameron Fry, who's trying to skip school and bag on teachers. And now we've got him playing the role of a teacher, trying to be an authoritarian person. Just kind of went full circle for that role for him. And then later on, the revenge that we get from really the Blissville Butcher as Millie's character. So I liked that aspect where they're pulling in not only from the horror genre, I feel like, of tropes, but pulling in something that was nostalgic with Alan Ruck and putting him in a role reversal himself in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that works really well. Like, well, Alan Ruck's great, and I always love when he pops up in a movie. But seeing him in this like pretty aggro role as the shop teacher was a good fun turn, something I don't think really seen from him. And yeah, I mean,
almost a body swap of himself.
yeah, kind of. Yeah, but we, you know, like, I don't know how much you want to go down that, since it's been out for a little bit, but if we want to go to the whole film, but we go, you know, through the rest of our day, and again, we know where this is where the movie doesn't necessarily do anything obvious because it's remaking a tried and true story. So like it is like kind of set in stone what are the beats going to be like once the story starts. Like they're waking up, they get that sequence, there's a fish out of water moment, which is like for you know, Vince Vaughn's character and the Millie's body is like the breakfast sequence, which all he knows is how to kill. And for a moment I'm like, oh, is he gonna learn how to be like a human and like have like a redemption angle to his story? No, he's just an uncontrollable psychopath, and that's just what it is. But now he's learning that like he's got this like teenage body and everyone like likes him and all this stuff, and like he can easily kill anybody because they trust who he is. And so we get a lot of like sequences where, like you mentioned, there's the ice one where he locks somebody in the cryo chamber, the physical ed cryogen chamber.
Also, what kind of budget does that school district have to have a cryogen chamber? I was like, whoa,
I want to go to that school.
I know.
But you get
have you ever used one of those?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
I've done an ice pack.
Scared to be honest.
Same thing, right?
Yeah. Wait, what'd you do?
Ice pack, yeah.
Right. Ice bath.
But we get all these moments that, again, we've seen like them trying to adapt to their personalities without being noticed, like, and like slightly do like a glow up, like she gets him in a better outfit, takes a shower maybe for the first time. He like puts her in a more badass outfit. So, they're doing all these iconic like things that the Freaky Friday movie does. And then it's like, okay, but we still have to overcome like the hardship, which in this one, it's not really learning lessons. It's swapping back to the bodies before midnight. And
you've also got the interesting dynamic that that's planted early on that you don't think too much about, or I didn't at least, not too hard on until it really becomes part of the storyline, which is her sister being a cop. And the trust of the relationship they have, which clearly is rocky from the get-go, like you said, when they set it up. But now there's a trust issue of, you have to believe me, I'm not the butcher, versus the killer that's in Millie's body, and the sister needing to believe Millie is telling the truth when maybe they have trust issues to begin with. I thought that was an interesting thing to play out in the movie as it goes on, when the sister's trying to investigate the murders.
Yeah.
Little Deputy Dewey, like a tiny hint feel of Deputy Dewey, like not as dumb, but almost a little dumbfoundedness plays into it.
Yeah, I would say very similar characters, like very likable, but like also like kind of fumbling.
Yeah, and not even on purpose like Dewey. Dewey just feels inherently kind of goofy, whereas this one happens because of the body swap. I think she gets kind of sideswiped and comes off that way a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
We mentioned some of the nostalgia in it, but it does have elements of kind of a John Hughes kind of growing pains in a modern day spin on it. And even with the supporting cast, right? Like you get a little flavor of that outside of just the fact that there's a serial killer running around, the everyday kind of trials and tribulations of that. So is there anything that you didn't like about the movie though? Because I know you are glowing about it, and I know you love it, and you liked it a little more than I did, and I think that makes sense from everything that you've said. But is there anything you didn't like about the movie? Is there something you would have changed about it, or anything with the storyline? Or
I don't know. I think I wish I could have watched this with a huge crowd of people. That's like the biggest.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing, and I think for people maybe even like yourself that didn't love it, I think that would have had the biggest differential is like how this movie would play with an audience, because I do think that would be it would play just big. I think it would be huge. The reactions would have just really made the movie. I mean, I always think back to a movie that, in my opinions, like not great, not terrible, but my first viewing was in a packed theater opening night, and that was Freddy versus Jason, and the movie is fine, but in a packed audience of people who were so excited to watch that movie, it played every beat so big, so perfect, and I really think that this movie would have done tremendous business to the box office and had maybe even like people that are lukewarm on it would have really liked it. So I think rep screenings maybe in a year from now, like I don't know what the Friday the 13th are in 2021, but I think that'll be something I look to do in 2021 if they're later in the year. It looks like there is one in August. There's only one Friday the 13th in August, so maybe I'll look to do that next month or next year.
That would be great.
Let's see how well it plays, because I do think it's a movie that would have benefited from that. I mean, having said that, like anything I can knock against it is like kind of its own, it's stuck in that structure of these types of movies. So
yes,
some of the beats that we've just seen that are a little like just a little, maybe feel a little stale, or it's just because that's the trappings of the movie that it's essentially, remaking or the rules that it has to follow. So because it's in the confounds of this type of movie, there's a couple things that I'm like, but I do like the body count's freaking high. I think, overall,
yeah.
There's probably 6 to 8 people dead in the first scene.
Right. Yeah.
She probably kills, I'm trying to think really quickly. I mean, she probably kills another 8 to 10. But I mean, just in that one sequence with all the jocks at the end, there's 4 or 5 people dead in that sequence alone. I would guess that the body counts around 20 in this movie, which is pretty substantial.
I think it's interesting you brought up the theatrical screening, right, for Freddy versus Jason. I remember going to that as well, and I was excited for it, but we've had for years like this horror icon versus this horror icon. It never really happened. It finally happened, and I watched it, but I didn't have a lot of expectation, and I just had a ton of fun at the theater watching it, more than I expected I would. And then I watched it years later at home, and I was like, it's fine. It was still actually a good entry. A joint entry, if you will, into those franchises and characters. But you're right. I mean, it made a difference in person, and I could definitely see that being the case here, especially for anyone that may have not seen it yet. If you take a friend that maybe hasn't seen it and kind of get their reaction to it, I think they'll have more fun if you haven't watched it. But it's also going to be removed pretty far. For instance, in August, if you were to show it, I'd see it again just because it's been so long at that point.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind watching it again either. I mean, I watched it as a pre-screener at home. I did enjoy it. The one thing is I feel like I didn't like quite as much the bookends. I mean, for some of the same reasons you mentioned, the bookends of how many people die, right? Like the opening sequence is great. Like I love the opening sequence, and it can't be balls to the wall the whole time. That would just be ridiculous. But you open with such a high energy, like everything's going on for the first 20 minutes, and then the body count doesn't really pick up again until the very end or toward the very end with the jocks. You only get maybe one scene in between with the shop teacher and the gnarly scene there. That's kind of a payback for all the times that Millie got picked on in school by the shop teacher, even though it's Vince Vaughn's character. I think that's kind of interesting that he channels some of that same aggression Millie might have had for him. So you really have bookends of body counts. And I would have liked to have seen her terrorize more people maybe in the middle. Just a little bit more, not much. And maybe it wouldn't have worked. Maybe it's too much going on at that point. It's a balancing act for them.
I'm trying to think. Well, you get the cryo kill. You get
the cryo kill. That's right. Yeah, well, maybe you do get
the party. you get the teacher. You get the cryo kill, and you get
two, right.
I think I want to say there's one more in there.
It's just not as like memorable because I mean those are pretty great kills. Well, seen at least.
Yeah, and I'm curious how it plays. I've only watched it once, but I'm curious how it plays on the second viewing because I keep talking about it now. Like it really does. There is so many longer beats before we get to the end. I'm curious how it plays, knowing where it's going to happen. Like. And maybe cognitively looking to see like, it's been 45 minutes before the body swap happens. There's only an hour left. That might really compound like how much is really happening. But yeah, I mean, I liked it quite a bit, and especially like slashers generally don't really hold up that well for me, at least. I think when they are great, they really work. Like, I mean, I think most of the Scream movies are terrific, and I think that they work because the characters are strong. I think this will be a very similar watch for me. I think the characters are just like strong, interesting, likable, and the kills are gruesome and playful.
For sure. I think there's replay value in it too. There's value in seeing it a second time because there's more than likely going to be a lot of details maybe you missed the first time. And I feel like if we watched it again and talked about this again, there'd probably at least 2 or 3 things we had forgotten about or just didn't realize the first time. So yeah, I can see some replay value in this. I mean, you mentioned the Scream franchise. I can watch those over and over again. One that's a little more of a modern take is Final Girls. That's one I really enjoy watching over and over again as a horror comedy that's kind of a supernatural realm to it. So maybe let's wrap it up with some final thoughts and or ratings on this. I actually think, and I need to watch this again, I feel like, to really decide. I think that I liked the Happy Death Day concept, or at least the Happy Death Day movie, the original one, more than this by a skosh. Like taking Groundhog Day idea and turning it into the horror movie is something that hasn't happened as much, I feel like, as just a body swap in general. I will say, I mean, I love Vaughn in the movie and I love Catherine Newton in it, but yeah, Happy Death Day, I think still a little bit better for me than this, but not much. My final rating's a 79, and I struggle with that because I feel like it might be a little higher if I get to watch it again. So I'm going to stick with that for now, with the possibility that it goes up a little higher on second viewing. What was your final out of 100?
Again, I've only seen this movie once. I don't feel great
about that, but
again, I've seen this movie once. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to watch it again. I want to watch it in more of a crowded atmosphere, so I might wait. I think that's what I'm holding on for, to at least watch with like a handful of friends. Initial view though, it's in my top 3, Tim. It's 3 of the year of horror of genre films. I'm gonna put this at a 92%.
That's fantastic.
I think this movie was just it just hit me in the right time. It was very similar feels I had to the new Bill and Ted film, which I liked quite a bit, because it was just, I wanted something, it's original in the sense that we've never seen this angle before, but it's familiar in the sense that we know the story, and it just hit all the beats. I hadn't seen a new slasher in some time that was like this vein, so it was nice to see this modern day take on a slasher. So it did just hit me in all the right feels, I guess, and all the other things on my top of my 2020 genre stuff are all much more serious movies and much more personal experiences for me, but this movie was just perfect, I think, and or damn near perfect, and I hope my second viewing is even more fun. I hope to throw popcorn into the air in excitement as I rewatch it.
I will say you're right. I mean, this is one of the more lighthearted films that we have of the year that was good. That made my top list as well. It did make my top list still. I think there's a little bit that took some of the points off for me, is maybe I had too high expectations for Vaughn. He did a fine job. I think at times I wanted it to be a little more funny, and I think that took it away. I mean, because all the horror beats are great, but if it's a horror comedy, I think I was expecting a little more interesting, like funny scenes from him versus just, I'm a teenage girl and I don't know how to act.
Right.
Kind of the throwing the hands up and being prissy at times. But yeah, I wanted maybe some more awkwardness even out of him. And so I think maybe that's what my hang up was, but I'd love to watch it again. Because I honestly do think my rating would probably go up on a second viewing. Consensus on this, Internet Movie Database, a 6.4 out of 10. Pretty solid, and Rotten Tomatoes 83 for critics, 80 for audiences, so pretty well received, I think, and kind of in line with us if you average out our scores. So that's kind of interesting. I always look at those after I give my rating, so that's, if you're interested in those, it's something to go off of. I don't tend to pay too much attention to it. I just think it's interesting to see what they are versus what we have. So yeah, I definitely recommend seeing the movie, and if you're able to hold out, see it in theaters. If for some reason there's a rescreening, like if Screenland shows it in August, I think that's awesome, because that's kind of the perfect amount of time, if you've watched it on VOD, I feel like, to revisit it too. And bring friends that haven't seen it if you get a chance. If you do buy it on Blu-ray or DVD, which I would also recommend, because it's probably got some interesting special features too. I would own it versus rent it for almost the same price.
Especially when you're looking at like the $20 price. Like if you remotely think this movie interests you, just buy it. Again, that's without the box office, that's, there's only so many different ways. That's how we're going to get more movies like this. But purchasing the movie is more of a traditional route. If you rent it for the $20, studios like Universal are going to see like, oh, well, they don't need the theatrical experience, that people just want to rent it at home.
Right.
But if you're buying the movie like you normally would on Blu-ray, they're going to see the more traditional route of releases. Like you would have probably seen it in theaters and then bought the Blu-ray. So my take, buy the Blu-ray. It's great. And you're right. It'll probably have some fun features on it.
It's worth that. All right, well, that's it for this edition of the Creepcast and Freaky. Don't forget, you can follow us at Downright Creepy or at Creepcast Pod on Twitter. Hashtag is at Creepcast. Let us know who you'd body swap with, and let us know what you thought of the film. If you saw it, did it make your top 10? to make your top films of the year. I know it did for Adam and I. So hit us up and let us know. Also, before we go out, kind of a plug session. Adam does the Nightmare Hour, but tell us about your new podcast, the Filmmakers Podcast.
Tim, it's the Filmmaker Podcast, but
so close.
But it is a podcast. You can find it anywhere. There's 2 episodes right now. The first is with Kevin Smith. The second's with Colin Trevorrow. But the podcast is going to be, a long form conversation piece about their career, their love of movies, and kind of how they got to the point in their career that they're at right now, or that they were at before, if their peak is maybe already, if they're on the other side of their peak. But we're talking about, anything and everything. And the conversations will range from 50 minutes to the Colin's episode is an hour and a half. But it's deep dive conversations. And I'm going to interview non-directors as well. Both those are writer, directors, producers. And they've been in, the smallest level to the biggest levels. But I have some, just interviews come up with screenwriters, directors, hopefully I'll eventually get to like some editors and some more general crew people, because it is the Filmmaker Podcast. And I want to talk about all the makers that are involved. And, there's so many people that have tremendous stories that worked on, hundreds or maybe even thousands of movies that maybe you don't even know their names, but they have tremendous impacts on the movies you love and you've seen. So check it out. Right now, it's going to be a monthly podcast, depending on the amount of guests and how quickly I get those. It might become a twice a month podcast, but and there's going to be some interactivity you can have in terms of like asking questions and early releases via our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Screenland.
Yeah, I listened to Kevin Smith one. It's fantastic. So if you get a chance, check it out, rate and review that as well. Kevin Smith, you can say, is a fan of the podcast, fan of the theater too. That's always fun. So he had his roadshow ride through Screenland. So Screenland's a magical place. If we can get back there sometime soon with big crowds, please visit it, and please visit it now if you can, or shop online at screenlandonline.com to rent something. Support that theater and all indie theaters if you can. So check that out. Now, as far as the Qrikets podcast go here on Downright Creepy, of course, we have Black Magic Coven, whose season 1 is about to come to an end. We have Wendigo coming up and Childhood Fears. And we have Super Creepy Fun Time Hour that's about to fire up again. We record that in person. We've kind of steered clear a little bit with the pandemic, so we're going to try and get that maybe after the first of the year and start it again. Hopefully that can become a little more regular. But what I bring it up for the most is that we're going to have a new show joining us on the network in January, and we'll be making that announcement. Let's see, the first of the year we'll make that announcement. It's a podcast that exists already, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. I can't talk too much about it yet because we haven't announced it. And then we have another one in the works with James Wallace from Fangoria. Nice. So look forward to those announcements coming at the beginning of the year. Of course, you can find us on the Qrikets Podcast Network on all social media, but it's best to just follow every show individually because that's what you really want to do. So check that out. And I think that's all we got for this week. Adam, do you want to talk about your top films of the year on the next podcast and what we're going to look forward to in 2021?
Tim, I would love to do that. Because I've been watching a lot of things since Eric and I did our kind of best of things. It wasn't just movies, but there was a lot of things that I had not seen yet. That may have changed my order in the last week. So yes, there's like 2 more I'm going to try to squeeze in before we do that, because I think that they're going to be quite high on my list.
Full disclosure, I released my list of top 20. I caught up on some films to be able to even make that list, but there's still probably 3 to 4 that I should watch because I have a feeling they might make it in the list or at least bump one out. Mm-hmm. The one that I will not be able to watch before then, which is a real shame, is The Stylist, because I bet it would have cracked the list somewhere. So that will maybe be one I put on my 2021 look forward to list, since technically it hasn't been released to the masses yet anyway. It's more of a festival movie at this point, but I think there's going to be some that make that list if I can get around to watching the 2 to 3 that I want before we chat. So cool. Look forward to that. This year's about over. We're almost out of the hellish year that is 2020, and we'll be in the first half of the hellish year that's 2021 and dig our way out. So thanks for listening, Adam. Thanks for joining me, and until next time, just stay creepy, won't you? You're listening to a Downright Creepy original on the Qrikets Podcast Network.